Terrorism represents a real threat to democracy, especially in racially mixed communities. How can modern society combat the threat while at the same time respecting human rights? Irene Khan, the first Muslim woman to head Amnesty International, and the President of the General Assembly of the Council of Europe, Rene van der Linden, came together to debate the issue. They began by discussing if the recent explosions in Morocco and Algeria will lead to a new rise in Islamophobia.
There is a risk when politics is driven by fear of the other. And I think in recent times we have seen, after the attacks of 11th of September, a great deal of security strategies built around fear of more bombs, fear of foreigners, fear of migrants, and from that has come Islamophobia, fear of Islam, but also of people who believe in Islam. And I think it's very important that there is a shift away from that, because stigmatization actually isolates communities. And the more you get isolated, the more polarized the two sides become. And when communities are pulled to two sides, it's the extremists who take the space in the middle.
The most important thing is that we try to avoid that the prejudices which are already in our society, that they will strengthen, that there is a kind of hate in our society. And for that reason it's important that we handle and manage this in a proper way. First, to avoid that it will become a problem also in France and other southern European countries. We have to take away a number of serious causes of extremism, like the exclusion, the poverty, absolute poverty. These are also elements which are part of the whole debate when it comes to the relationship between Islam and Christianity and others.
Some of the violence in places like Morocco and Algeria is of course being driven by their own internal domestic situation, where there has been a history of human rights abuse, of extremist politics and divisions. So that also creates violence there, which then gets exported in different ways to other parts of the world. And the best strategy there is to build understanding and tolerance with communities.
We organize a lot of conferences and especially address the right problems. The whole discussion about the Danish cartoons was one of the examples. And of course there are different opinions between the one who said under all circumstances freedom of speech and freedom of expression is always allowed. I don't belong to them. And others who say, yeah, if you really insult groups, then the border, the limit of freedom of speech and expression has been reached. And you have to take into account also to respect the other.
Can I be a bit provocative here? One of the things that has always struck me in this sort of inter-religious or intercultural debate is there is a risk here of picking a single identity. You know, I'm a Muslim, but I'm also a woman. I'm also living in Europe. You know, there may be other things we share. I don't know, maybe books, art, theatre. If one sees multiple identities, it's easier to build bridges than if one approaches from single identities. Sometimes the moderate voices are not being heard. The voices of women are not being heard. The voices of those who differ are not being heard. And there is a risk that sometimes the extremist ends then be seen as leaders of the community.
For me, it's not provocative. For me, it's daily life here. And you have extremists in the Catholic Church, you have extremists in the Muslim world, you have extremists in the Protestant Church, and the Orthodox Church.
I feel personally that the Danish government was right in allowing the cartoons to be published. That was freedom of expression. But where I think the government could have done more was to have come out with an early statement reassuring the Muslim community that the publication of these cartoons was in no way some kind of an attack on them, and that the government was ready to protect their rights as a minority and their religious views, but their religious views did not entitle them to impose some restrictions on someone else's.
When you don't publish cartoons about Christianity because it is an insult for you,
Yes.
for your citizens, your believer in your country, then you must be consequent and don't publish it for other religions who are not so present in your country.
Yes.
If you want to have freedom of expression,
yes.
then you have to do it not in a selective way.
All sides. And I think that's a very important feature of human rights because that's about universality. And that's what makes human rights such a powerful tool, I think, in today's, if I may say, today's divided world.
If you want to fight against terrorism, and especially the methods of terrorism, then you cannot use partly the same methods. If people are suspect, they have to be brought to justice, independent justice, and they have to be under the international rule of law. And for that reason, we are condemned also as one of the first international institutions, Guantanamo Bay. You cannot, as the United States, claim moral authority and invade and go to war to defend the human rights, the democracy and the rule of law, and at the same time don't respect the international rule of law.
Human rights and security are not two different things to be balanced against each other. It's actually through human rights that you create a more secure environment. So in that sense, the values battle is the important one. And therefore, governments cannot fight terror with terror. And the work that the Council of Europe, Senator Dick Marty did, that the Secretary General, Terry Davis, did in exposing these issues actually strengthened the work that the human rights groups were doing, like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty, in exposing black sites, in the case of Human Rights Watch, in our case, the renditions story, to show that European governments, they have to be true to their own values and standards. Europe cannot have double standards.
Yeah, just sit down.
Thank you very much.
Thank you much.